U uvodnom delu i uvodnom obraćanju imali ste prilike da čujete u baš obraćanju gospodina Živkovića o standardima usluga karijernog vođenja i savetovanja. To je pravilnik koji je upravo ove godine u junu usvojen i on nekako ima za cilj da pruži smernice za sve one koji se bave karijernim vođenjem i savetovanjem kako da unapređuju kvalitet svojih usluga. Oni koji su sa nama bili na prethodnim konferencijama čuli su već i o standardima, zato što je to naravno proces koji je trajao nekoliko godina i oni su vrlo zaista detaljno od strane radne grupe izrađivani, tako da ovo što se desilo u junu je zapravo finale celog tog procesa, a to je i formalno usvajanje samih standarda. O njima možete da čitate i u biltenu koji ste, verujem, uzeli za vreme pauze. A ovo sam uvela kao priču zato što kada govorimo o kvalitetu usluga karijernog vođenja i savetovanja, zapravo moramo da govorimo o nama kao praktičarima i o tome koliko mi zapravo vodimo računa o onome što radimo, aktivnostima koje sprovodimo i koliko dozvoljavamo sebi ili se podsjećamo sebe da se osvrnemo na ono što smo radili i da na neki način samoevaluiramo ono što smo radili, da bismo opet imali svest o tome koliko smo dobro zaista nešto uradili i da eventualno naravno imamo ideje i za dalje unapređivanje oblasti. Upravo o ovoj temi će nam govoriti današnja govornica, dr. Šivon Niri, koja dolazi sa Univerziteta u Derbiju i koja zapravo ima dugogodišnje iskustvo bavljenja temom karijernog vođenja i savetovanja i sa istraživačke strane, ali i rada sa praktičarima koji, kao i vi, se bave uslugama karijernog vođenja i savetovanja i upravo radi dosta na polju usavršavanja, stalnog profesionalnog usavršavanja praktičara. I bez daljeg uvoda, sada bih prepustila reč profesorki Niri. Dear professor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I just realised I've no headset on, so I've no idea what you're saying. That would be better. Oh, that's much better. I'll stand a little bit away. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Šivon Niri. I'm from the University of Derby. Unfortunately, I have a cold, so I am keeping myself to myself. But if you can't hear me, I do apologise. I'm speaking at the best level that I'm able. But if I have a coughing fit, I have water, so I will do my best to keep going. I just really want to extend a thank you to the team for inviting me here and to you for welcoming me to talk to you about an area of work that is, I think, is hugely important. My background is a careers practitioner. I've been working as a careers advisor, trainer, lecturer, researcher, manager, everything, I think, probably, for over 30 years. And for me, I think that reflective practice and reflexive practice is one of the areas that we actually give least attention to in the whole of the sector. And it's something I've been working with a colleague in the Czech Republic on recently. We've just done some work on looking at critical reflection. So talking to you today is an opportunity to bring together a number of ideas around reflection and reflexivity, and the importance across all of the work we're involved in, regardless of who your client group is, and it's a way of looking at the world. So I've a number of slides. So what I'm planning to talk about in the time we've got together is to start to explore a little bit about what the role of reflection and reflexive practice is within career guidance and counselling. And also to present to you a number of examples or activities that you may already be using, in which case it's useful as a refresher, but there may be some ideas of things you might not have tried before that might be useful to you in what area of practice you're involved with. And also to start to think a little bit about critical reflection and the role that that takes in terms of moving career guidance and counselling from just a client-focused activity to perhaps more of a wider challenging activity in addressing equality and diversity. So there's quite a lot to do in the time that we've got together. So I'm going to start off with, is anybody familiar with or has ever heard about Harry Potter? Okay, right, so it translates into international. Okay, so I've got a quote, you can't read this terribly well, so I do apologise, but this is a quote from The Goblet of Fire. And in it, you may have seen the film, you may have read the book, you may be hugely much more aware of this than I am. I have read all the books at some point. But what I think is really interesting about this particular scene is that Harry is with Dumbledore, and they come across what is this big, like a big bowl, which is called the pensieve. And Dumbledore is saying, I sometimes find, and I'm sure you know the feeling, that I simply have too many thoughts and memories crammed into my mind. Harry's not too sure about that. He hasn't really got to that point in life. At these times, says Dumbledore, indicating the stone basin, I use the pensieve. One simply siphons the excess thoughts from one's mind, pours them into a basin, and examines them at one's leisure. It becomes easier to spot the patterns and links you understand when they are in this form. And I think what's really useful about that quote is, although it's quite it presents an immersive and a passive approach almost to reflection, but what it does do is it presents a focused, structured activity in terms of dedicating time, having a resource, having a tool, consciously bringing to the forefront the thoughts, the memories that Dumbledore wants to explore, and actually use an approach to structure a consideration to identify what the patterns might be and what that actually means to him in terms of coming to grips with perhaps problems or issues that he's dealing with. So I'm inviting you all to have a pensieve, either a metaphorical one or a real one, and we could perhaps share how we get on with the approach at some point in the future. But what I've been talking about so far is I've used the term reflection and reflexive, and it's useful. As a researcher, I like to define things so that we're all clear about the things that we're talking of. Because one of the challenges, and I think this is often the case in career guidance and counselling as well, is that are we all talking about the same things? You know, is my definition of something the same as your definition? Is your definition as a practitioner the same as a definition of the client who sat in front of you? So ensuring that we're talking about similar things is a really important starting point. So the definitions I've used here and the 4 areas I'm going to talk about are reflection, which is reviewing our practice to help us learn, helps us to think about what we've done and why we've made the choices we've made. Reflective practice, which encompasses reflection as part of it, is the process of actually trying to improve our practice by articulating and developing the work theory through learning about ourselves and our work. And then reflexivity, which builds again on this, focuses on the internal reflections and acknowledges the impact of our behaviours and the ability to look inwards and outwards and recognise the social and the cultural understandings. So it's very much around recognising that what we do will have an influence on the people that we work with and how we think. And then critical reflection is the awareness of the social and political context in which we practice. our ability to unearth and change fundamental assumptions through a focus on power. So with critical reflection, we're looking more at the externality in terms of what the structures are and agency and who has the power in terms of support and working with individuals. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we come to it. One of the things I often use when I do any type of training is the conscious competence model. Has anybody come across this before? Okay. I really find this a useful way to start. What it is if it's 4 stages, it's a process. And it starts with what we call unconscious incompetence. And many of us will spend initial part of any activity that we're learning in unconscious incompetence. So it's where we're not really aware of the skills or the relevance. So for me, that's often exemplified by, practitioners have told me this, or even clients have said, well, career guidance, career counselling, surely it's just sitting and having a chat, you know, that's all you do. And of course, we as practitioners know that's not what you do, and it's a lot more complicated than that. So unconscious incompetence is really that initial stage where you have no sense of what the requirements are. And then as your awareness becomes greater, you move into what we call conscious incompetence. And what conscious incompetence is the panic where you realise this is a hugely complex activity that you really are struggling with. So, for example, if you think about within the career guidance and counselling context, you're expected as a practitioner to listen, to build rapport, to internalise and interpret what the client is saying, to hear what they're actually telling you, to think about your next question and the question after that, and what response you're expecting to gain. You're reading body language at the same time. You're thinking about tactics and strategies that you might use. So you're engaging in a whole set of cognitive activities and appearing very calm, and appearing to listen and to recognise and to build a good relationship with the client that you've got in front of you. And I remember vividly being an inexperienced careers advisor sat in front of a young person in school thinking, oh my God, what do I say? What do I ask? How do I start this? So the complexity of what we do becomes more aware to us the more experience we get. And eventually we would hope to arrive in conscious competence. And conscious competence is where we're able to perform the skill, we're competent to do the role. And I like to articulate it that, you know, at any point I can stop somebody who's interviewing and say, okay, tell me about the question you've just asked. Why have you structured it that way? What are you hoping to get out of it? Why do you think that is going to elicit the best response from the client that you've got in front of you? And the practitioner would be able to tell me exactly what they've done, why they've done it, and what they hope to achieve. I wouldn't actually stop anybody in the middle of an interview to do that, but in theory. And then the 4th stage is what's called unconscious competence. And that's the point where it becomes automatic pilot, and we all do this at some point. We're sitting down and we're perhaps asking the same questions. We start the interview in the same way. We're not tailoring it. We're not making it. We're not thinking necessarily about what it is that that client might want, what they might need. And the reality is that we will all move through those phases of 3 and 4 regularly. And perhaps if we're developing new skills, maybe delivering psychometric assessments, or we're using some sort of new technique, cognitive behavioural therapy, or something else, then we'll be moving back round to 2. So we're continually in a state of flux. But it's important to recognise within this that reflection is central to all of these activities, and that there are practitioners who might actually spend most of their life in conscious incompetence because they haven't thought about what they do and what the impact is on their practice. So reflection is a multifaceted activity. It can support us in learning, in thinking, defining and redefining what we know. So it is a fluid activity in terms of developing our practice, developing our knowledge, developing our experience. Challenging assumptions. Assumptions are, I think, our nemesis. The worst thing we can ever do, I tell all my students on the first day that they come to our training course, we train careers advisors and we train career leaders in schools. I always say, never ever make assumptions about anything, because that really is the worst thing you can do in careers work. I will talk a bit more about that. It helps you to think through your values and to respond to the external circumstances, learn more about who we are and what we do, and build ourselves both as professionals, as people, as we learn more about what's important to us, and to hopefully to see the world in different lenses and through different lenses, depending on who we're working with. There we go, right. So in summary, it's about being aware of what, why and how we do things, questioning the things that we do, seeking to understand underlying rationales and strategies, hopefully generating choices, and thinking about what else we might be able to do that we haven't previously done before, and viewing the activities from different perspectives. So I'm going to just take you on a little bit to some of the theory that underpins reflection and where that comes from. John Dewey was an American philosopher, and some of you may be familiar with his work because he's sort of an experientialist, pragmatist, educationalist. But he also did quite a lot of work on reflection, and he proposed reflection as a rational process. So something that is structured, something that is that individuals purposefully engage in. So he talks about, while we cannot learn or be taught to think, we do have to learn to think well, especially acquire the habit of reflection. And he goes on to talk about this in terms of being a purposeful act. So it's something that we purposefully sit down or stand up or however, but we engage in it. It's an active, purposeful activity. So it could be persistent, careful consideration of any belief, supposed form of knowledge in the light of the grounds that support it, and further conclusions to which it leads. It includes a conscious and voluntary effort to establish belief upon a firm basis of evidence and rationality. So what Dewey's talking to us about there is really helping us to think about how we might learn from reflective processes, that we're actually, through thinking about what we're doing and why we're doing it, we're gathering together evidence around what works and why it works. So rather than everything being a theoretical approach, we do this because somebody's had an idea that this might be a good idea. The reflection actually helps us to gather the evidence and to work more consciously on that. So within your practice, I'd just like you to think about a couple of questions. These are meant to help you think about what stimulates you in terms of reflection on your practice. I could ask you all to, be open and say, yes, who reflects on their practice and how do they do it? But we're not in the right environment for that. If we were in a smaller group, maybe. But I would like you just to think about the last time that you reflected on your practice, where you were, what prompted it, what were you reflecting on? When I've done training on this with people in the past, they've often said to me, oh, well, I tend to do most of my reflection when I'm driving home at night or when I go to bed before I turn the light out. That's when I think about my day and what worked and what I felt really pleased about, and perhaps if there's a problem in terms of a client that I was working with that I was really struggling. So just for yourselves, just take a minute and think about it. And think about, how do you reflect? Is it sitting down, thinking about it? Do you do something more practical? Do you talk to colleagues about it? Colleagues are a hugely important resource in helping us and to be soundboards for why we might choose to take a particular approach with a client. What sort of issues or topics do you tend to reflect on? Do you tend to focus predominantly when perhaps something is out of your comfort zone, or if it's a critical incident, or if it's something that you just feel quite emotional about? Or do you tend to focus as well on things that might be more typical in terms of the clients that you're working with? What challenges you about reflection? What are the barriers? Why don't we reflect as much as we do? We talk a lot about it. We train people to do it in my country. It's a key part of our professional training for careers practitioners. But actually, the extent to which that we all do it, I think, is quite limited. As a registered practitioner in the UK, I have to register 25 hours of CPD a year. For those 25 hours, I have to reflect on what I did. And I'll be absolutely honest, it is very, very minimal. I really don't engage myself even in the level that I should do. So thinking ourselves and actually challenging ourselves about our reflective processes is really important. So some of the challenges might be that you have misplaced expectations. You're not quite sure really what it's going to do for you. Maybe you've never really had the opportunity to engage. It might be that you've got a personal preference that you think, no, that style of learning is not for me. I don't learn in that way. There are other things that work better. It might be ego. Who knows? It might be pride. It might be you think, well, I can't, I know it all already. What would I learn? And I do know some practitioners like that. I challenge their professionalism. It could be that it's the way you've been trained. It could be just life. It could be the basics about time. It could be that it feels quite difficult to think about things like that, to actually expose ourselves because we feel quite vulnerable. And sometimes it is very hard to be reflective. It's hard to pull together perhaps one of our encounters, one of our interviews, our interventions with a client, and to actually unpick it. It makes us feel vulnerable. It might make us feel our confidence is being challenged. So to engage in some of these activities that I'm presenting to you does take courage, and it can be a challenge. So there are a number of different ways, and I'm just going to present a few examples for you. So one of them is reflective writing. And people who are involved in creative writing usually enjoy this type of activity. Others of us who are perhaps less creative find it more challenging. But just finding an opportunity to have a few minutes and to sit down and to write up the most immediate experience that you've had. So always write in the first person. This is about you. This is your personal form of writing. It can help you evaluate it because just transferring your thoughts into paper can help in trying to order or structure and to review the activities that you were involved in. So it can work as a form of self-supervision because you're questioning and challenging. One of the activities you can do, and we encourage our students to do this, is what we call a 6-minute write. And it's basically a stream of consciousness. We invite you to sit down and to time yourself and just write for 6 minutes. And you can write about anything. It's just about experience of writing. You don't have to think about your spelling. You don't have to think about what it is you're writing. Just sit and write for 6 minutes. And just see what you've written at the end, and just see what sort of things have come out. And it can be quite a liberating experience. I know one of my colleagues uses it with some of his doctoral students as well, because actually trying to get doctoral students to write can be a real challenge at times, surprisingly. So actually using writing activities can be a really useful way of engaging in professional reflective activities. So now moving on a little bit to reflective practice and the process of improving through articulating and developing practice theory. Much of the work that I've been sort of schooled in comes from Donald Schoen, who some of you may be familiar with his work. He was writing in the 1980s. And what Schoen identified really was a challenge between what we're taught through being trained in practice and what the reality looks like actually out in the field doing the job. So, you know, I'm sure many of you think back to, you know, when you trained as teachers or you've done training as guidance counsellors, and actually what you learn, and then you get out there and you think, that doesn't sound like what I learned. This is all very, very different. But what he presented to us was the concept of reflection on action. And also the concept of reflection in action. So there's two that he brought. So the reflection on action is the one after the fact, where you find time and you think about what you did. And you're quite deliberately re-engaging with it. But reflection in action focuses, I'll just go on to that one. No, we've gone, right. Reflection in action is almost unconscious. And I think reflection in action for us as practitioners in careers, guidance and counselling is where we are. Because if you go back to the example I gave earlier around conscious incompetence and about all those skills and all those activities we consciously engage with at the same time, we are reflecting in action. We are making choices, we're making decisions about what we do, almost instantaneously. And unfortunately, people don't recognise it because it looks very sophisticated and it's very smooth. People don't really realise, you know, that it's a hugely complex activity. So what Schoen was challenging us to look at, and I'll just go back to those two questions, is what informs the quality of our reflection and what affects its accuracy and its validity. So they're questions that you might want to think about yourself in terms of quality. What does quality reflection look like? And that, I think, is going to be very individual. I think it depends on who you are and what works for you. And I think one of the real strengths of reflective activities is the opportunity for you to do what's right for you, to tailor it appropriately. But what he does challenge us is, you know, can there be reflection without action? And can there be action without reflection? Because if we're acting without thinking about it, are we actually moving anything forward? Or are we just staying in the same circle, doing exactly the same things that we've done before? And again, I quite like these examples from Schoen. The effective reflective practitioner is able to recognise and explore confusing and unique events that occur during practice, so they're more prepared to actually deal with the unexpected, whereas the ineffective practitioner is confined to repetitive and routine practice and neglecting any opportunity. So what Schoen's talking about there really is the unconscious competence that we were talking about earlier, in that you're just going through the same thing. And the reality is, if you're in that mode, then how much benefit is your client actually getting from you? Because it's mechanistic, it's a mechanistic approach. And I've had that conversation with practitioners many a time when, particularly those who work on contracts in England for the adult career service, and they have to tell the client a whole load of information at the beginning. I don't know if you have it in this country, but if you're renewing your car insurance and you ring up and they talk at you for about 10 minutes, telling you all the terms and conditions, well, a careers interview in the adult sector in England, the start of it can be like that. So you totally lose all the rapport, you lose the relationship because you've just told people all the terms and conditions of engaging in the process. That's not good. It's not the best practice example. So with Schoen and with reflective practice, it's almost like the overarching process or model, if you like, where all the reflective practices sit, so that we're able to select as appropriate, but also to build the different forms of reflection depending on what we're engaged with. So I'm going to just introduce you to a number of frameworks, just as examples. There are many more than this, but I thought probably 2 or 3 was more than enough really in the time that we've got. But all 3 of them have something in common, have 3 fundamental processes in common. They are retrospective, so they're actually looking back rather than reflection in action, which we've just looked at with Shown. So they're reflection on inaction processes. They're all self-evaluations, and they're focusing on feeling and emotion. And that's where sort of the theory and the work has evolved from Dewey, whereas Dewey was a very rational approach. He didn't include anything on emotional feelings. So that most of the new models that have come out really focus much more about you and what this means to you in terms of your feelings. And also looking at how you can reorient and reevaluate your experiences as a result. So COBE is one that people are often familiar with. It's a very common model of experiential learning in terms of recognizing there's an experience, reflecting on the experience, gaining knowledge or learning as a result of the reflection, and then putting it into practice again. So we often use that in a lot of action research models where we're testing out things and we're using an iterative approach to help us try and refine something to make it work. But it fits well in terms of a quite simplistic model of 4 stages really of reflective practice. We've also got Gibbs, and Gibbs is focusing more now on feelings and emotions. And what Gibbs suggests is that we start by being very descriptive. And this is actually quite a useful process in terms of reflective writing that you can work through and ask yourself these questions and respond to the answers. You know, what actually happened? So being descriptive, being very factual, this happened such and such and such. And then feeling. So what were you feeling and what were you thinking at the time? So starting to get to analysing a little bit about what is it? What did that make me feel at that point in time? Did I feel upset? Did I feel uncomfortable? Yeah, I was feeling a little bit sick in my stomach. Why? Why did I start feeling like that? So evaluating, you know, what might have been good and what might be bad. No, I felt really bad about that experience. Why did I feel bad about it? And then moving more formally into the analysis. So what does that tell you? What is it that you're able to understand as a result of exploring your feelings and evaluating them? So what could you have done if you were in that situation again? What might you do differently next time? So that process of Gibbs, I think, is really quite helpful, and I use it quite a lot with in talk sessions as well. So if I'm doing group sessions with students or career development, career management skills, I often use this as a way of reflecting on what works and why and what I need to learn going forward. John's model is one that we've adopted from clinical practice. Christopher Johns is actually a nurse, and his area of interest was around palliative care. And he developed this model for nurses who were working with end-of-life patients. But we draw from all sorts of disciplines in careers work. We are multidisciplinary at the best of times. But again, it's very feelings, very emotion-orientated. And it works well, particularly, I think, perhaps if you're working with very challenging clients, this might be a model that helps particularly. So again, focusing on awareness of discomfort. So what is the discomfort that you're feeling? And he's swapped them around. He's doing the awareness first and the description afterwards. So describing the situation, including your feelings, your thoughts, the events, what are the features that stand out to you in terms of that. And analysing those feelings and knowledge, identifying and challenging the assumptions. So the word assumptions is coming up here. In what assumptions were you making as a practitioner? And then evaluating the relevance of your knowledge. Does it help to explain or solve the problem? What have you learnt? How might you use that knowledge now that you've become aware of a particular situation that has impacted on your feeling of your comfort zone? And identifying any learning. So what do you take with you? What can you apply going forward? So again, all of these are cyclical process models that help to sort of break down the different elements that you might want to focus on in terms of reflecting and being reflexive in your practice. So again, there's a whole load of activities that you can do. Some of them linked to writing reflectively, so learning journals or reflective diaries. We always encourage our student trainees, our trainee guidance practitioners, to do a reflective diary because it documents for them their experience, their practice, their confidence as they grow. And we ask them to reflect back on it at the end of their training and to summarise what they've learned and how they feel about it now. And it's often a very useful basis for a professional discussion. You can, if you're more electronically minded, have a blog. You can make it personal to you. You can open it up so that you could share your thoughts on reflection with your colleagues. You could also look at discussion forums. There's lots of online materials you can do. You can look at using an audio diary. Many of us have smartphones. Many of us are obsessed with smartphones and the gadgets and the apps that go with them. And there's a whole load of things you can do with your phone that can support you in these sorts of activities. So actually recording. So rather than writing it down, you might feel more comfortable recording it. If you're really brave, you might video it. I personally wouldn't, but some of you may want to. But video diaries, a collection of those. The important thing is that you're gathering this and you're doing it as soon after as you're possibly able to, and that you're reviewing it and you're coming back to it and you're building it as your evidence base of your reflective practice and how you're developing and growing as a practitioner. Also, observation and feedback. We use this extensively in the UK. Most careers practitioners will have at least one observation a year against a framework. Some like it, most hate it. In my experience, I think I've had both ends of the extreme. I did try to introduce an observation process when I worked as a university careers advisor, and one of my colleagues threatened to go to the union on me, which I thought was a bit of an extreme response to professional practice. We didn't. In the end, I left, so I thought, let them get on with it. But on the other end, I used to do a lot of work with our telephone guidance service in England. And the difference there was that their practice was that they, on a monthly basis, would take one of their recorded interviews. All their interviews were recorded because they were all telephone-based. They would select one interview and they would bring it to a group called a quality circle. And as a group of maybe 4 or 5 people facilitated by a quality coach, they would dissect the interview and they would discuss it, both in terms of professional practice, but as reflection, as the information that was used, the techniques that were used. And every one of those practitioners, whenever I would go in and get the headset on and sit and listen to their interviews, were always totally welcoming, and I, really looking forward to talking about my work and how I can move it forward, as opposed to other practitioners who worked in face-to-face practice that you could tell as soon as I turned up, they just drained. They were absolutely terrified that I was sitting in on their interviews. My job is not to judge. My job was always to be there in a very constructive role, and I learn so much from observing other people's interviews. I definitely recommend it as a way of developing practice as well as developing reflection and reflection. But you have to be careful with feedback. You need to think about the relationships that you've got. It has to be respectful, supportive. You have to be specific. So rather than just, saying, well, that was all rubbish, wasn't it? Which, hopefully you would never say. You would be focusing on, okay, well, at the end of your contracting, the questions that you were using there were X, Y, and Z. Were they the best? Were there others that you might have used? So thinking about how you can ensure that the feedback is specific and precise, and it's focused on opportunities to develop, not there to just tell somebody their work is terrible. We're not about being judgmental. That's not what our professional or our ethical framework is about. So not being vague, not being general, and definitely not being negative. So just moving on now to reflexivity. And within this, as I said, we're talking very much about the emphasis on looking inwards and outwards. And to be reflexive, we need to be aware of the ways in which we create and influence the knowledge that we use. So the knowledge that we have, and that's the knowledge that we bring to the interview, the knowledge that the client brings to the interview, is mediated by both our physical and our social lenses. And what that means is that we're all individuals. We all bring to our role, to every interaction that we have, the totality of our learning, our exposure to different experiences in life, different ways of thinking, different values. And what's important is that we recognise our own subjectivity and our social position. Many of us, have been very privileged and have had, we have a good education, we've come from hopefully supportive families. Not everybody we work with has had that start in life. And it's recognising that because we may have much more privilege than others, how that has influenced the choices that we've got, and that not everybody will have those choices. That the knowledge that we have is interactional, so it's shaped by the structures that we work in. Just as one example recently, I was I assessed for universities their training courses, and one of the assignments was a careers advisor who'd written about how she really promoted vocational education to all of her students, which on the face of it sounds really good. But actually what she then went on to say is that she'd come through a vocational route and it worked for her, so it should work for everybody else. And you think, well, no, that's not right at all, because you're focusing everything on your experience, and it's not about you, it's about the person in front of you. So it's very much about recognising that everything that you say will be influenced by your own experience in life. There we go. So being more reflexive and recognising where we stand and what's influenced our own position in life helps us to better understand ourselves, and also to step out of ourselves and to look at how our relationships are with our clients, with our colleagues perhaps, and what informs those. So connecting ourselves more broadly with the social, cultural and structural environment through understanding our own ideas and what's produced those and the assumptions. So there's a quote there from a colleague, Hazel Reid, and Hazel's written extensively about reflexivity and also about supervision and about how guidance can be supported through a counselling supervision model as well. But what she tells us in relation to reflexivity is it's the process by which we're aware of our own responses to what's happening in the context of events and our reactions to the people, so how we're reacting to the people, the events and the dialogue that is taking place. A reflexive understanding will include an awareness of our personal, social and cultural context and its influence on both the speaker and the listener. Reflexive awareness leads to a deeper understanding of how we construct knowledge about the world and ways of operating within it. So again, as I said, it's moving the whole reflective activity on to being much more focused on ourselves in terms of what influences our thinking. So again, if we want to think about how we can assess ourselves and reflect on that, using, with permission, obviously, audio or video record interviews and listen to them or watch them, and try and identify for yourselves about what you're thinking at different points of the interview. Why were you thinking that? What factors contributed? Thinking about the assumptions that you're making in the interview. What were these about and what led you to them? So why did you make that assumption? What did you and how did you share the power? Because if you think all of you will have status within your organisation, whether you're a teacher or a counsellor or a psychologist, you're coming from a perspective of power, whereas the person you're working with does not have that. So it's how do you ensure that they feel empowered through the process and that they're able to maximise and benefit and move forward rather than being feeling that you're the one that's in control and you're the one that's directing everything. So just moving on a bit to pull this together with critical reflection. As I've already said, Shivon presented us with the gap between formal theory and actual practice. And his focus is on helping us to excavate theory from actual practice rather than espouse practice. So that's basically, you know, what do we really know about practice? What is our experience of it as opposed to the theoretical models that we're often presented with? Professional practice, in my context, whether this is the same for you, I really couldn't comment on. But it's becoming increasingly managed through objective, routinized and measurable systems. So it's about metrics. Everything we do in the UK is about metrics. That's all anybody cares about. We're now assessed in universities on the salaries that our graduates earn on graduation. That is one of the metrics. We have no control over that, but we're still penalised by it. And in our career service, our National Career Service, which works with adults, they are paid on the basis of a job on a satisfied client, a job or learning outcome, or that they've developed a career management skill. And that's what the funding is. The funding is focused on that. So that informs a set of behaviours that perhaps aren't always as professionally practiced as we would want, but unfortunately that's the model that they work with. So when you're working within these types of environments where you've got lots of externality impacting on your practice, what makes reflection critical is to focus on the power and recognising that you may be influenced and you're being told to be influencing on the basis of what other people's agendas and targets might be. So when we're talking about power within this context, we're thinking about it with the sort of the Weberian view of one exercising one's will over others. So, you know, two key competing targets we have is around young people going into higher education, but also young people going into technical and vocational education. So practitioners are being challenged the whole time with these various models in terms of outcomes that clients and students they work with are expected to get. So just thinking about this professional practice and the need for critical reflection, I suppose the point I'm trying to make here really is that the work we do is not in isolation. Everything that we do is influenced by either the external policy agendas that we're working in, whatever they might happen to be, but also that all the clients we are working with, all of them will have particular needs. So whether we're working with you know, children who have visual impairment, whether we're working with children of SEND, who are migrants, who are Roma Gypsy traveller, or I'm doing quite a lot of work with military service children at the moment. So all of those have a specific set of need. And critical reflection is around helping us to understand what those external challenges might be and how they might influence some of the work that we're doing. And as careers practitioners, we seek to work in a pluralist engagement of recognising the importance of values and diversity for our clients as well as the practitioners we work with. So, recognising the constraints that we work under is quite important in terms of motivating to be and try and challenge some of these barriers to us. So just really to pull this together, so critical reflection draws from reflective practices, we've already said, reflexivity, but also theoretically from postmodernism and deconstruction and critical social theory. When used, it can help improve professional practice because it focuses on the power dimensions and understanding the power dimensions and challenging the assumptions that we might have about the work that we do. And it's not just about our professional practice, it's across the board. It's how do we challenge social injustice on a daily basis, and critical reflection is one of those things that we can do. So in order to work effectively and creatively, we need to be aware of our own identity and how it's shaped through socialisation, through professional training, through migration. We need to understand our motivation and expectation towards the work that we do and the fields we work in, and the relationship between the personal and the professional motivation that the organisations we work for. How aligned are our values with the values of the organisations that we work for? And there's a whole load of questions there around critical reflection. And again, I'm sure we can make sure these slides are made available to you. But again, some of these we've already alluded to, thinking about what was I assuming, what language, words, patterns have I used? Are we using jargon at the most basic level? How is that creating a power dynamic if we're using terms and that are not accessible to the clients that we're working with? How have I constructed myself in relation to other people? Can I use my power differently? Do I need to change my ideas about myself or the situation I work in? So all of these could be much longer lectures all in their own right, so it's a bit of a snapshot. So again, thinking about how we might use tools for this. Again, I've mentioned sort of critical friends are incredibly important, identifying somebody you might work with, that you can review your ideas and your thinking with. Formal supervision, if it's available, incredibly important, and counselling. And actually for clients, for practitioners who are working with demanding clients or working in very difficult, challenging circumstances, formal supervision might be something you might want to think about. But also thinking about your creative side. It doesn't have to be audio, it doesn't have to be video, you can draw. You know, we often do exercises with our students to get them to create something, so to draw what this means to them. So draw your reflections rather than writing about it. So just some final thoughts. Reflection is not about focusing solely on critical incidents or things that go wrong. It should be an implicit part of all our professional practice. It should influence our way of viewing the world. Reflection and critical reflection are not just about work, but about how we see our place in the world and what that means. Reflection is, in my view, the most underrated but often the most important element of our continuing professional development. It links experiential learning and it provides a way for us to conceptualise and internalise our observations of both the practical tactics, strategies, performance that we give, but also to understand our feelings and our emotions and to learn from that in moving forward. Reflexivity provides us with a new lens to challenge ourselves and our thinking. It makes us conscious of parts of our practice. But don't just try one, try lots and find what works for you. One that is worth looking at is Barbara Bassett is a colleague at Canterbury Christ Church in England, and she's written quite a lot on reflective practice, but she's produced a journal. So it's called a reflective journal, and there's loads of activities in it and spare pages so that you can use it. It's an already well-constructed tool. But think for yourselves about creating and time and planning for reflection. Use how rather than why reflections. Use any type of tool that you want to. So it could be questions, it could be the models that we've explored. Try different modes. So using writing, using audio, using other forms of creative practice. Use collage, whatever you want. But use something that allows you to reflect back on it so that you're not just doing it as a one-off, you're coming back to it. And ask leading questions. And use colleagues, everybody benefits. So I think that is me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Šivon. I think you provided very good framework for our discussions later on, because we will have a lot of discussions, so thank you again. Sada bih voljela da otvorim prostor za pitanje iz publike. I would like to open a room for questions. Tako da, ukoliko neko ima neko pitanje, može da postavi i na srpskom, pa će naši prevodioci to prevesti. Tu je koleginica sa mikrofonom. Samo nas nekako obavestite da želite da postavite pitanje i prići ćemo sa mikrofonom. U redu. Čini se da sada nemamo neka pitanja. To je u redu. There's no question at the moment, but I'm sure that maybe they can approach you during the lunch or contact you later if they have questions. U redu, hvala. Onda bih se ja još jednom zahvalila Šivon na divnoj prezentaciji i sada bih pozvala paneliste zapravo, jer je to sledeće po redu. Ovo što je Šivon pričala je zapravo dobar uvod za ono što će biti sledeća tema. Tako da, once again, thank you. I would like now to open the panel discussion with our teachers, and thank you again for providing such a valuable framework for us.